Shepherd Traffic makes transportation analytics software that uses computer vision to analyze road infrastructure and road users to make cities as beautiful, livable, and human-centered as possible. We do this by analyzing video directly that has been placed in public,
Like here, just
Right.
behind us.
right here, and turning that into analytics that can be used to really understand not just how the infrastructure is structured, but how people use it to make their lives better.
How that bicyclist takes it to commute, or how they walk along the park, things like this. The
Mhm.
stories.
And so while we're doing that, there's a lot of power in what we do and a lot of power in the analysis and the data we create. But at the same time, there is a concern of privacy and surveillance. We're essentially working with cameras that are in public, that are frequently, always stationed and permanent, or sometimes just put up, for a day or two to gather data. And they are in public, and they are capturing what people are doing, and we're working to get that data into government hands and DOT hands. And so there is a very real question about what type of surveillance we might enable and how that impacts people's lives. And so we'll be talking about that on this episode of the Shepherd Traffic Podcast. I'm Joel Roberts.
I'm Colin Hughes. So as Joel mentioned, we're the startup Shepherd Traffic. We make transportation analytics software to make cities as beautiful, livable, and human-centered as possible. So we thought today would be a great day to come here. We're at Collectivo in Milwaukee, right along the lakefront. Represent. And then for those of you who haven't been here, this is one of the only cafes that really has a fair amount of lake breeze and has an access to the marina here. But we wanted to film today because this is a good location. So why is this good?
Yeah, and this, if you don't know, it's like right on the lakefront. There's a bunch of outdoor seating and indoor seating. It's an old, it's like an old river pump building that they turned into a coffee shop. It's absolutely beautiful. We have a friend who's French who has recently come to the States, and he told us that when he drove past here, he saw it, and it was like the most European thing you've ever seen. Right? You see pictures of Europe.
In Milwaukee.
Yeah, in Milwaukee,
Right.
not in general, right? There's just outdoor seating, people enjoying space, people really enjoying the beauty that Milwaukee has to offer, right? My brother, who I live with, has said similar things where he basically says it's the most James Bond drive-through in a European cafe in a motorcycle location he's ever seen, right? It's just an absolutely beautiful place. If you're ever in the area, come and get a coffee and say hi.
Yeah. But we digress.
Yeah.
So we want to talk today about privacy and surveillance because we're here in public, we're filming, and it touches a lot of what we build. Because what we build can be used and interpreted, in ways that maybe infringe on, or maybe are grouped together with something like Flock, which is very popular now, very infamous.
Yeah,
fact.
and like Flock cameras, which a lot of people know about, that's the thing that's probably most in the news right now or in the public mind or public eye of, if you don't know, they're a company that makes cameras with computer vision abilities. They pop up cameras just on poles, and they essentially catalog like what cars drive by. And so they can capture not just like what license plates of cars drove by, but also like make and model, and even
Bumper stickers.
Yeah, bumper stickers and identifying details. And the goal is that if you know where every car went and you need to solve a crime where a lot of times people get away on with a car, you can solve those crimes, right? But on the other side, there is a very real criticism where people dislike or claim that it's unconstitutional or illegal or authoritarian to say there are cameras out there that are cataloging everywhere you drive your car, and we're going to store it, and if we need to, we can pull it up on you.
What's the best case for them, though?
Yeah, so let's
steelman their case.
Yeah, let's steelman their case. And this is, my best understanding of their argument, because they make a very, very strong argument. Their thesis is that crime, when it happens, is not like some crazy thing that we don't understand. A crime that occurs is someone who is in a situation where they see the benefit and, the payoff of a crime is worth the risk of getting caught, right? You have the risk of getting caught, the risk of going to prison, then you have the payoff of what you get from it. And their claim is that if the payoff is better than the cost, people will commit more crimes. And so their thesis is if you really want to prevent crime, you just make it guaranteed that if you commit a crime, you're going to get caught.
So their thesis isn't necessarily that they're going to solve these problems. They're going to actually prevent them. So
Yeah.
they're actually going to prevent crime as opposed to seeing who committed the crime.
Right. And so you can imagine that if you have a city that has a lot of like car break-ins, right? The city of Milwaukee, we wouldn't know anything about that, right?
Right.
If there's a lot of car break-ins and
Sure.
you're a car thief and you break into a lot of cars and then you get caught or you hear that people start getting caught, you might think twice. And so it's not just stopping people who are already doing it, it's making the cost of committing that crime significantly higher, and so fewer people make that choice. That's their case. And they actually have like really good data that says, I think there's a decent number of cities that have reported like 50-60% decrease in their homicide rate. I think they've had cities that install their systems that have seen like 0 homicides in a year when that is not the case. And you can say, despite the cost of a loss of privacy and despite the cost of creating this surveillance system, they are saving lives, right? And that's a very, very powerful claim. And a lot of their early marketing was literally, there was a crime that happened that was solved with their system, and they just went on the news and told that story, right? And that's an incredibly powerful story. Like, here's someone who got kidnapped, and they got found and brought back because of flock cameras. And that's the end of the commercial, right? It's a very compelling...
That's a very compelling point. And you can also think that privacy is in some ways a luxury. Now things have become a lot more individualistic. You know, we have cars now.
Mhm.
And so a few centuries ago, everything was even more group-centered. So you couldn't hide things. So in many ways, the internet has increased surveillance, but it's also increased the capacity to guard your privacy,
Mhm.
which is quite interesting.
Yeah, well, actually, in a weird case, like there's been a lot of ways that you can use, digital technology to increase your privacy or keep your data private. But on the other side, it's like almost the opposite. I see a guy I know right there.
Jay,
Yeah, you can run into people
Yes.
in a beautiful area in town. But-
small here.
yeah, and on the other, so there's a lot of places that you can create privacy, but there's also, like, Google is always tracking you, Facebook is always tracking you. There's
Yeah, your phone's always tracking you.
your phone is always
listening.
tracking you. One thing that I learned from Flock is that your geolocation from your phone is something that can actually be it can be warranted and gotten by police officers. And so one of the ways that, like, a lot of times they solve a crime is they just get a warrant to get the location of someone's phone, and then it turns out they went right to the place of the someone just brought
And
their
they
phone.
they basically have proof or evidence that they had been at this location at this time.
Yeah, and that's frequently sufficient for a conviction, or at very least to get a plea bargain, right? And so despite all that, like, your phone is something that can be pulled on warrant at any point in time. There's data on you from a bunch of tech companies, and unless you live in like Europe, you don't have any right to take that down. With a lot of like the new AI models, we're finding that there was a hack because they were doing a test on some new crazy model, and they had it in a sandbox, and it got out, and it just started messing with some stuff. There was a really interesting story where I think it was OpenAI or Anthropic, I forget which one, but they were testing a model on some machine learning task,
Mm-hmm.
and it got out of containment, and then it hacked into Hugging Face, which is like a machine learning.
It's a repository
yeah,
of
it's a-
data sets.
Yeah, it's a bunch of data and models.
Yeah.
Or what? It's a machine learning techie thing. Don't worry about it. It's a big website with a bunch of data, and it hacked into their servers because it was like, well, I bet I could just find the answers somewhere on Hugging Face, right? It was trying to find a lazy, smart way to get through it, which is, by the way, a pretty smart thing to do. Of like, I don't want to go through all the work of actually solving it. I bet.
Let me
there's-
just cheat.
yeah, and like a lot of things in life are actually kind of good where you should say, okay, there's a lot of work to do. What if we just came up with a clever solution? On the other side, you don't want to cheat, right? So there's a weird dichotomy there. But what I see when I see that is your right to privacy in public is not guaranteed. Your right to privacy on the internet should be assumed not true. It should be completely assumed that when I'm on the internet or I'm doing anything on a computer, I'm basically I have a weird acceptance that the FBI is staring down every single thing I'm doing.
Right, because we talked about private surveillance, but this also leads into public surveillance.
Right.
Things like the Patriot Act, other things that allow surveillance on American citizens. It's not a secret. This is very, very much documented, and unfortunately is the state of our privacy now. So
Right.
whenever you're on the internet, whenever you're using something, you should assume this is not private.
Right. And so, and like kind of bringing it back to Flock.
Yep.
So that's an extra place where there's now no longer an assumption of privacy. But they have a really strong case of this doesn't just solve crimes, this solves crime problems and changes, changes the scales of society such that crimes are prevented because the payoff equation doesn't work anymore.
Right now, the likelihood is much higher, and so now you're doing your computations in your head.
Right.
You're saying the probability is too great. I'm not going to do this.
Right. I should get a job at Kroger or something.
Right. That $100 break-in isn't worth it.
Right. And so that's their case. And I think it's actually a really strong case. And the evidence and the data they have to support that case is compelling. And, we want to be very honest that it's a compelling case, despite the fact that there are privacy concerns. And here's the criticism I would have of that privacy concern is I just can't see how it's not a massive violation of the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says you have a right to due process. It is a restriction against the government for unlawful search and seizure, and you're not allowed to, if you're going to do search and seizure, you need to get a warrant from a judge, right? There's a judicial process to do those things. And when I look at Flock, I just can't see how that's not a massive violation of people's privacy to an extent, right? Now, here's another steel man. Someone might say, in response to that, well, you don't have any right to privacy in public. Your car is registered with the DMV. There's an identification plate on it for a reason. It's not illegal for a police officer to stand there at the corner and write down the license plate of everyone who goes by. That's perfectly legal. The only thing Flock does is automate that and make it a lot easier and build it up by scale, right? And that's actually a pretty compelling argument because they're absolutely right. There is nothing wrong with just writing down what's happening. Again, there's no assumption of privacy in public.
In theory, though, there's more oversight.
Yeah, we're recording a
So
live
in
podcast.
theory, there's more oversight into how the public, the policeman, collects your data. There's a lot more checks into that, in theory. But now Flock is a private company, and so when they're collecting this, how does that change the equation?
Right. And so they contract with the company. It's fairly common for private companies to contract with the government, right? That's something we're trying to do. There's not really a problem there. The problem I would see is that there is obviously a difference in scale, right? In the same way that if I was holding a bullet and I toss it at you, that's perfectly fine, right? There's nothing wrong with me taking a little bullet cartridge, like a 22 caliber or 45 Magnum caliber, and toss it at you and then you catch it.
Sure.
Nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
If I load it into a 45 Magnum and fire it at you, that is a crime. The only difference is the speed and power and energy I give to that bullet. And so all of a sudden what I'm pointing out is that, yes, the trivial case is legal, but when you increase the scale by multiple orders of magnitude and you automate it, that becomes a completely different thing. And everyone understands that intuitively. And so when you massively increase the scale of things, of what you're surveilling, that is obviously a different thing. And that is obviously a completely different system. And you can't argue them that they are equal just because one is orders of magnitude greater.
Well, and especially because there are so many laws that we don't know about. I mean, the amount of legislation is quite extensive. So you can be found to be guilty of basically any crime. Especially now as you scale that up, we're able to extract information from all sources at any given time. Now you are guilty, my friend.
Yeah. There was actually a recent story where, and I think it was from last year, there were public court documents or something, but someone had suspicion of a guy who had jumped bail and had some charges on him. And so they used Flock to surveil him and noticed that he went to from Wisconsin to Michigan a lot because Michigan has legal marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the like count of suspect that he goes to Michigan a lot, they surveilled him, tracked him, and when he came back, they used a flock camera to pull him over, and they found weed on him, right? And so when I look at that, like, that is such an obvious, clear violation. Nothing saying that that person was a great person.
We don't know. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, person had actual counts on them. My point is, that is so obviously a violation of civil liberties. And if you just can't convince me otherwise, I just haven't heard a convincing argument that says this is not a massive violation of the Fourth Amendment because reason. And maybe there's a reason for that. Like, I'm open to having my mind change. I just can't see it one way, right? And so kind of bringing it back to what we're doing. In the same way that Flock has cameras that they put up or that they use, and they run computer vision on it to pull analytics for law enforcement, Shepherd Traffic, we work on video that gets pulled from those cameras. We analyze it with computer vision, and we use that to understand the infrastructure and try to make it better, right? That's kind of our core thesis, is not only can we make a lot of existing analytics a lot better, but we can just understand infrastructure at a much deeper level with analytics or analysis that wouldn't be possible otherwise.
Because the technology that we've become interested in is really just that vehicle to get to where we want to go. We want to make cities better. I mean, your original mission or your original problem with this was being stuck at red lights. That was frustrating.
Yeah,
Nobody likes bad infrastructure.
Right. The very original thesis of like why I started working on this problem is I sat at red lights and I was a math guy, and I bet there's a way you could time stoplights if you knew where everyone was to make it more efficient. With the most obvious case being, I'm at a red light, there's literally no one else, maybe it's like 2 a.m.
Just let me through. Come on now.
Why do I have to wait 20 minutes for a pedestrian that isn't here, right? What if it just knew that there were cars and pedestrians and it just did a bunch of math in its head, and I figured out what the math was because that's an interesting problem to me, and then boom, right? You get a better light timing. That was the initial problem I wanted to solve, right? And part of it was just hubris. I was like, I bet I could do something better, and I kind of still think I can, right? And so the side effect of that, and maybe tying it into Flock a little bit, is people have asked, is this something you want to do to automate like ticket enforcement? Enforce red light cameras, which are actually frequently illegal in Wisconsin.
But somewhere like Illinois
has them. A lot of the West Coast has them. And so here's the thing, is like even in that vein where it's actually infrastructure, we are very disinterested, and not only disinterested, but we are not going to do that. We are so disinterested in automated ticketing because it feels like a misappropriation of responsibility. Yes, it's your responsibility as a citizen to follow the law. But when I see automated ticket enforcement of old archaic laws that were like put in place 50 years ago based on old traffic engineering standards that are obviously outdated, I see a laziness on the part of the government that says, we don't feel like improving the infrastructure. That would be expensive. We want to do the easy thing of getting tickets and making people do what we want and ignoring it from that.
It's removing accountability. It's like instead of preventing this problem, you're just trying to push this blame off onto the person who's running the red light. But what if the problem is bad infrastructure? What if it's like your timing just sucks? Somebody almost got stuck there in the past, and so now they run that light because they know then they'll be stuck for another minute because they just don't feel that intersection is fair. That it's not helping them, that they're not being listened to. Right.
And our claim is not that there's not a place for law enforcement. Our claim is that we don't want to do it, and we don't think it should be something that's automated. Right. It's so easy to build a system where you automate compliance to a law that you haven't considered changing or making better given new information instead of actually improving the infrastructure. And here's a really good example, and I've told you this story a bunch of times, but I'll tell it again because they haven't heard it. I was at some ITS conference, Intelligent Transportation Systems conference in DC at one point, and there was somebody presented a project they'd done where they had essentially put not even red light, but just stop sign cameras, automated ticketing cameras in some neighborhood. And so if you rolled through a stop sign, it'd take your license plate, send a ticket to your door. And so they put it in, and within a week, they had given out, like, I think $1,050 tickets to people in the community. And people rightly went, hey, when did I all of a sudden become like a massive lawbreaker? Like, I've been at this stop sign forever. No one's ever had a problem. Why are we getting a bunch of tickets? And the engineer at that time said, well, let's pull up the footage. And they pulled up the footage, and what had basically happened was, in all, like most of the cases, people just didn't all the way come to a stop. Like, they mostly stopped but rolled a little bit, and that's technically against the law. It had never been enforced like that ever, but that's became what was enforced. And everyone went, well, okay. And the rationale this engineer used, and it still grinds my gears, is that if it saves the life of even one child, it's enough. But at no point did they do any research or any work to understand or connect rolling slightly in a stop sign to a child who had died.
Yeah, that's a big claim.
Right. And so that's such a load-bearing claim.
It's almost like you can't argue. It's like, oh, I like children.
Yeah, it's like, okay, yeah, I don't want any kids to die either. I think that is a very worthy thing to work towards, obviously. But you did no work and you did no research to actually connect what you did to that claim. And so if you actually care about that end, you should have made sure that's actually what you were doing. You don't just pull that from nowhere and say, well, we're saving kids. You have no idea about that. And what really bothers me is they built out a whole system, new technology, government contracts, and they just assume it makes stuff better, but they didn't use any of that technology to actually figure it out. They didn't use any technology to figure out, well, why are there people dying? Like, who's dying?
Where are they? Yeah, where is this?
Like,
What is
let's
the
actually,
circumstance?
like, there's so much technology you could use to actually figure out, like, okay, kids are actually dying at a higher rate. There's a worse pedestrian death rate, right? If you don't know, like, the driver death rate is actually going down recently, but the pedestrian death rate has gone up. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. And weirdly enough, I haven't seen any research that says the reason is because people are rolling through a stop sign lately.
Especially in a community where they probably know each other.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot more at stake there. To be that guy who ran over a kid, like, nobody's doing that. You're
Like,
paying-
imagine living
could be
with
your
that for
children.
the rest of your life.
Right.
Like, that'd be a horrible thing to live with, right? Some of the research I've seen is actually that, like, because cars are getting bigger, particularly like really big trucks where the truck bed is like the truck hood is like 5 feet up above the ground, you literally can't see small children. And so that's like one specific cause. Another cause that you might actually consider as to, like, why kids aren't getting killed at the rate that you might even expect, given how much our cities are built around cars, is that kids aren't allowed out that much, right? When was the last time you saw kids playing in the street?
Right. It's like they're protected. they're over-sheltered in person, but they're under-protected online.
Right. You know.
Right.
Jonathan Haidt.
Right. And we
Right.
don't need to get too much into that. There's a whole another podcast.
Right,
But the
right.
point is that kids really aren't out on the street. You know, they're being protected more now.
Right, and part of that is, like, they just feel that it's unsafe. And so one thing I would point out is, like, don't even just look at, like, okay, a kid didn't die. If you want no kids to ever die, you should, like, lock them in a cage and feed them and, you know, do other stuff to make sure they don't die. But that's antithetical to human flourishing. If you actually care about kids having a better life, you might even consider, you know, if things get worse and the death rate goes up and more kids die, you'd actually probably expect it to go down in the future because more people will know someone who had a kid get run over, and they're going to say, you don't get to go outside anymore. And so,
it's like a sharp drop down. It's like it reaches this threshold of, like, okay, this is bad.
right, and so what you might even consider is people are going to respond to that incentive the same way that if you make it super obvious that you're going to get caught for a crime, you're not going to make that choice. If you make it super obvious that your risk of getting run over or your kid's risk of getting run over is super, super high, you're not going to let them go outside. And so one thing you might even consider measuring is, like, are kids even outside in the street at all?
Right.
Is that the reason that you know, nothing's changing or that no one's dying, is that people have seen the risk and say, I'm not even letting my kids go outside. I'm not even going to let my kids cross the street. And figuring out, how do you design the road so that, people can drive and use it the way it needs to be used, and you're not massively restricting the freedom and rights of kids to, like, be free, and not just putting up a ticketing system and says, well, we saved kids' lives, I bet.
Right, because there was no proof there.
Yeah.
The evidence, the claim lies on them. They have to show that this is meaningful, that there's something here that we can demonstrate.
Right.
Okay, this is saving lives, given that there had been 10 accidents here, 10 fatalities.
Right. And so the thing that really bothers me is that it's just deeply incurious as to the problem. You're using the problem to justify the thing you already wanted to do. You don't actually I'm not convinced you care about the problem, because you didn't do study or work to figure out, like, okay, why are kids dying? Let's figure it out. Is there an actual problem that we can solve? You saw law and you automated enforcement, which massively, changed what happens.
Yeah, you didn't even talk to the people.
Yeah. And so, figure out what people care about. This, and, I'm, losing my mind a little bit, because it's like, I saw a technology in, some newer car or whatever, and I was going to write, a really snarky thing on LinkedIn, because the technology was, it knows what the speed limit of the road you're on. It just GPS tracks you. And then you can set it to, 5 more than that. And so what other people saw was like, oh, nice, I can drive as fast as I want and not get a ticket, and that's a nice little problem. What I saw is, you built a system that builds a car communication that goes to satellites. Your car is going to space and back, and not just once, at least 3 times, because you need to triangulate satellites to get a location. You're going to space at least 3 times and back from your car. You've built all this technology, and you're using it to only break the law a little bit. And no one's looking at that and says, maybe we could reconsider what the speed limit is. Or maybe we can reconsider what it means to be a reckless driver. Maybe we can reconsider, if we want people to go slower, what if we narrowed the roads? What if we added trees so that you feel more claustrophobic, right? There's a lot of research that shows if you want speeds to come down, you just make the built environment one that implicitly tells you slow down, right? Narrower streets. When was the last time you blew through a street where there's parking on both sides and a car's coming? If I'm driving on my street and there's cars parked on both sides and someone's coming the other way, we're going 5 miles an hour. And no one had to tell us to do that. We just know. And there's all this new psychology around it. And there's all this new knowledge and research. And I'm looking at a really old, outdated transportation system, and I'm saying, we could update the rules. We could actually learn some stuff. We could apply all this technology that we're applying to, surveillance and automated enforcement, to what I see as maybe not a broken system, but a flawed system, and we could improve it.
Instead of making it more and more broken,
right?
And patching it more and more.
It's
addressing the foundation.
It's an incuriosity of the actual problem, and it shows that we actually don't care about the actual problem. Because if you cared about the actual problem, you'd learn more about it, right? And so we're not only disinterested, we don't want at all to do anything that is automated ticketing, that is anything surveillance. We've actually made sure that our vision models at the moment and going forward actually can't tell anything distinguishing about you other than okay, you are a passenger car. This is a pedestrian. This is a person on a bike. This is a 6-axle truck or a 4-axle truck. That's what's important for building and maintaining good infrastructure, and it has nothing to do with tracking you. It has nothing to do with automated ticketing you. We're so disinterested in that. It's
and as you can see, Joel's quite against that. We both come to agree quite a bit on that's not what's meaningful. That's a bad way to live, and ultimately a bad thing to produce.
And it's actually kind of the genesis of the name Shepherd Traffic.
Shepherd Traffic. Tell us.
The goal of capturing data with computer vision and turning that into really detailed data is not to enforce it on the people, on the flock, on the herd, on people who are going about their lives. If you're a government, you're in a leadership position, you are the shepherd of the people, and you are a public servant. And so your job should be to make their lives better. You are the shepherd, right? And so the responsibility should be upon the shepherd, that the sheep are taken care of and the sheep's lives are not in danger. And so when I see something like, let's automate enforcement, I see that as it's a bad shepherd who is putting all the responsibility on the sheep.
As opposed to on
Right.
themselves.
Right. Be a leader. Go first. It's so disappointing to see leaders who are like, everyone else needs to do a problem and we're doing great.
Mhm.
No, you can do better, right? And
Or always shifting the blame.
right.
Oh,
And
this isn't our fault. This is this is speeders' fault. This is
right.
that grandma going 5 miles over the speed limit.
Right, and we can actually talk about Milwaukee. There is like a massive campaign, a Vision Zero campaign, Safe Streets, that is like trying to curtail speeding. And we actually went to the Vision Zero conference. It was a couple
months ago. Yep.
couple months ago, and I went to it like the victims' rights group where they had a bunch of people who had someone they knew in their lives. It was like a brother or a daughter who was killed by reckless driving, and they were victims' rights advocates, and they were, also working on how do we curtail speeding. But in basically all of the stories we heard, it wasn't someone going like 10 over in a 35. It was someone going 120 in a 35.
And someone fleeing, like
Right.
situations where it was very precarious. It was
Right. And so when I look at that, I'm saying the incuriosity to that problem is creating a solution that's not precise enough, right? And here's the thing. If you want to look for people who are going 110 down Fond du Lac Avenue or something, or, 70 in a school zone, you can figure that out. And I think that's a worthwhile understanding. And you can look that almost all of the damage is done not just by people going like 10 over, but like 30 over. And that's not speeding. You going 10 over the speed limit, I see that as like a lot of times, yeah, you do need to slow down and slow down. Don't drive so fast, right? What are you in a rush for anyway? You live in America. Life is good. You can be a few minutes late. Probably.
Yeah, why do you have to go in the right turn lane just to pass me and then be stuck?
Right, and we can take responsibility as citizens, absolutely. But I also just see that you could solve that with better road design.
Yeah.
You could solve that with better infrastructure. And you could solve that by targeting the actual problem of, like, if you're going 100, that's so much more of a problem than if you're going 10 over.
Right, and it's fair to say they won't pay that $50 ticket that they get in the mail.
Right, and really being precise about what's making those tail end issues. How do we deal with that? And really being honest of updating our priors of, like, I think it's this, but the evidence shows otherwise, right? And finding data so that we can make those arguments and we can get that evidence and figure out how do we improve the system, how do we improve the city as best we can,
Yeah, that's probably a good place to stop.
It's probably a good place to leave it off. All right, I'm dying in the heat. I'm Joel.
And I'm Colin.
This is the Shepherd Traffic Podcast. Thanks for listening. Bye.